Welcome to The Explainer. You ever feel like your mood just gets hijacked by the world around you? Well, today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea from Dana Rongione's Rise Up and Build series. It's this concept of a wall of the ears. We're going to break down how the sounds we let in can either build us up or, tear us down. And more importantly, how we can start taking back control.
The author kicks things off with this quote, and it really makes you stop and think, right? We're not just talking about loud, obvious noise here. It's the subtle soundtrack of our lives. You know, the news humming in the background, the tone of a coworker's voice, the lyrics to that song you can't get out of your head. All of it seeps in and can actually shape how we feel, a lot of times without us even knowing it's happening.
So, to really bring this idea to life, she uses the biblical story of Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And it's such a powerful metaphor for rebuilding our own emotional and spiritual defenses. It's just a brilliant way to actually visualize the process of getting stronger.
Now, this wall of the ears is just one of 4 key defenses that the author talks about. But you could argue it's our first line of defense against that daily barrage of negativity. So let's start by really understanding what happens when that wall is weak or, just not there at all. The whole idea, the core of this entire approach, is actually based on a piece of ancient wisdom from the book of Proverbs. And it paints a super vivid picture of what it feels like to be emotionally vulnerable.
What I find so striking about this verse is just how perfectly it captures that feeling of being completely overwhelmed. I mean, without these internal walls, without the right defenses, we're just left wide open to the emotional enemies, right? Things like anxiety, depression, and discouragement. We literally feel broken down.
And here's the kicker. The real psychological heart of the issue. Our brains are wired for repetition. It's just how they work. So when we hear something over and over and over again, whether it's criticism from someone else or our own negative self-talk, our neural pathways literally start to treat it as the truth. This is why guarding what we hear isn't just a nice little idea. It's like a neurological necessity for our mental health.
Okay, so before we can start building anything, we have to know what we're building against, right? It's kind of like a general studying the enemy's tactics before a big battle. The source material breaks all these auditory threats down into 2 main categories.
Now, what's so interesting here is the split between external and internal voices. The external ones, well, they're like Nehemiah's enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, just shouting insults from outside the city walls. But, and this is so crucial, the author points out that often the most relentless, the most damaging enemy is the one that's already inside the gates.
To give this internal voice a name, the author brilliantly calls it our inner Eeyore. Now, the name might be a little lighthearted, but that voice is anything but. And for anyone who's ever wrestled with anxiety or depression, you know these phrases aren't just words. In the moment, they can feel like the absolute, undeniable truth.
And this, right here, is the first, most essential step toward healing. You can't fight an enemy you refuse to see. Just by recognizing that this voice exists, by giving it a name and separating it from who we really are, we start to take away its power. We create the space we need to finally challenge it.
Okay, so if the problem is letting in all these negative voices, what's the solution? Well, it's not just about trying to block them out. The author introduces this powerful strategy of replacement. It's all about actively choosing what gets to fill that auditory space in our minds. This is what's called a hearing replacement exercise. It is an active, intentional process. It's not about trying to create some silent, empty void in your head. No, instead, it's about strategically and consciously swapping out the destructive lies of despair for constructive words of truth and hope. This breaks the whole strategy down into 3 simple, totally actionable steps. First, you learn to recognize that inner Eeyore or that external criticism the moment it pops up. Second, you make a conscious choice to reject it, to call it what it is, a lie. And third, and this is the most important part, you actively replace it with something that is true and life-giving. This verse from Romans is presented as the core engine of this whole replacement strategy. And the logic is really simple, but it's also incredibly profound. Faith, or, a positive, resilient belief system, is built by what you consistently hear. So if despair comes from hearing messages of hopelessness, then hope has to come from intentionally listening to messages of truth and encouragement.
All right, so what does this replacement strategy actually look like in our day-to-day lives? I mean, it's one thing to talk about the theory, but it's another thing to actually put it into practice. The author gives us a fantastic toolkit of really practical listening suggestions.
So the key here is to be intentional about filling your idle time. What are you listening to when you're driving, or doing chores, or exercising? Instead of just letting your mind drift off into Eeyore territory, you can purposefully fill that auditory space with content that builds you up. And hey, notice that clean comedy's on the list? Laughter is such a powerful tool for shifting our emotional state.
This is such a great question the author asks, because let's be real, music is an incredibly powerful force. It can completely change our mood in an instant. But not all music is created equal when it comes to our emotional health, so she offers a very simple test.
What I love about this is how personal and empowering it is. This is basically a simple mindfulness exercise. The goal isn't to create some universal list of good or bad music. The goal is for you to become the curator of your own mental soundtrack, choosing what brings you peace and refreshment, not chaos and agitation.
This story of David and Saul, it's like the perfect model for what music's true purpose can be in our mental well-being. The right soundtrack doesn't just entertain us, it can actively bring peace to an agitated mind and help push back against those feelings of despair.
So building this wall of the ears is a vital, totally transformative step. But as we start to wrap up, the author makes it crystal clear that this is not a standalone solution. To build a truly resilient spirit, we've got to zoom out and see how this one wall fits into a complete, interconnected defense system.
Think of it like a fortress with 4 main gates. To be truly secure, all 4 of these walls, the mind, the tongue, the ears, and the eyes, have to be built and maintained together. What you let yourself think, what you choose to say, what you listen to, and what you focus your eyes on, they all profoundly influence each other. A breach in one wall compromises the entire structure.
This is such a stark but really necessary reminder of why we need a holistic approach. You can't just manage what you hear while you let negative thoughts or critical words run wild inside your head. If you neglect one area, the entire city of your heart is left vulnerable.
And that leaves us with this powerful, very personal question. Being the gatekeeper of your mind. It isn't a passive job. It's an active daily decision. Every song, every podcast, every conversation is a brick that you're either using to build your defenses or you're allowing it to be used to tear them down. So the real question isn't just what you listen to today, but who are you becoming because of it?